January 6, 1977. A young American walks up to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City and throws a package over the fence. Mexican police tackle him in seconds. There'd been a run of embassy bombings that year. They assume he's the bomber. He isn't. They search his jacket and find strips of film, and that film is America's most classified satellite secrets. His name is Andrew Daulton Lee. His best friend has been photographing those documents from inside a locked vault. For nearly 2 years they hadn't made one mistake. It ends because one of them couldn't wait a few more days. To understand how expensive that afternoon was, you need to see how careful everything before it had been. Start in Palos Verdes, California. Ocean below, lawns above. The kind of suburb people move to, so nothing happens. Christopher Boyce and Daulton Lee met there as kids. They served together as altar boys at the same church. Boyce's father was a former FBI agent who ran corporate security. Clearances and background checks were dinner table talk. Boyce kept falcons. He'd stand on a hillside with a bird on his glove, watching it go up and come back. Lee went the other way. By his 20s he was selling cocaine, which is where the nickname Snowman came from. Boyce was the Falcon. Snowman and Falcon, two boys off the same street, headed in opposite directions. In 1974, Boyce needed work. His father made a call to a friend at a defense contractor. The company was TRW in Redondo Beach. Boyce started at 21, pushing paperwork for about $140 a week. Within months he was moved into a small room the employees called the Black Vault. It was about the size of a bedroom. 2 young men worked in it. That was the entire staff. And what ran through that room was the CIA's traffic, with its listening posts on the far side of the world. Boyce handled the ciphers. Every day he loaded fresh code cards that scrambled and unscrambled those messages. He was 21, holding the keys to a channel most generals would never be cleared to see. Here's what those messages were about. Because this is the part that makes everything else make sense. America had satellites parked over the equator, hanging still above the map, aimed at the Soviet Union and China. The program had a code name, Rhyolite. Its job wasn't taking pictures, its job was listening. When the Soviets tested a missile, the missile talked. It radioed home its fuel burn, its guidance, its altitude. That chatter is called telemetry. Engineers need it. Without it, you can't tell what went wrong on a test. Rhyolite hung up there catching that chatter mid-air, plus radio and microwave traffic across the ground below. So Americans could sit in a room in Virginia and read the specs of a missile the Soviets were still building. It's the difference between knowing your neighbor bought a new car and reading the invoice on his kitchen counter. That was the most valuable thing America knew about the Soviet arsenal, and it rested entirely on staying secret. The moment the Soviets learned their telemetry was being read, they'd encrypt it, and the window would slam shut. Now picture the room all of that passed through. Guards, silence, procedure. That's what you'd expect. What actually happened in there? They mixed frozen drinks in the machine meant for pulping classified paper. They drank on shift. The safe sat open. Nobody above them ever really came down to look. A hungover 21-year-old was minding the crown jewels, and the only real security was hoping he stayed loyal. And then the system itself handed him a reason not to be loyal. Misrouted cables started printing on his machine. Traffic he wasn't cleared for, about a close American ally. The messages discussed manipulating Australian politics, its unions and its leadership, while Australia's own Prime Minister was being forced out. And Australia hosted the ground stations pulling Rhyolite's take out of the sky. Partners, and quietly worked at once. Boyce read it day after day, alone in a locked room, with nobody he was allowed to tell. He'd been raised on the FBI version of his country. This was the memo version. They didn't match. He decided the lying should cost somebody something. That's the decision the rest of this story hangs on. So he called Daulton Lee, the altar boy from down the street, now moving drugs across the border. The split made sense. Boyce could reach the documents but couldn't vanish for a weekend without questions. Lee crossed into Mexico for a living. Nobody would think twice about where he went or why. In 1975, Lee walked into the Soviet embassy in Mexico City carrying film and a handwritten note. Within weeks he had a handler, a schedule, and an envelope of cash. The operation was running. And Boyce's method inside the vault was almost boring, which is exactly why it worked for so long. He photographed documents with a Minox, a camera about the size of a lighter, right there at his desk. Sometimes he carried originals out hidden in a potted plant, shot them at home and brought them back. Documents he was supposed to shred, he logged as destroyed. Then he photographed them instead. That's the whole trick, not a heist. A 22-year-old ticking a box on a form nobody ever audited. If that reframed how these things actually happen, that's exactly what this channel does. Stick around. Lee flew the films south. Across the operation, the Soviets paid out tens of thousands of dollars in cash. Boyce took a share and banked it. Lee took more and put it straight back into his own supply. And the tradecraft the Soviets gave them was genuinely good. This is the part people forget about this case. No phone calls about the work. Meetings set by code, chalk marks on a wall meaning I'm here, or I'm not. Rendezvous points that moved, backup dates weeks out, and one absolute rule: never approach the embassy. Ever. That rule is the one that matters. Keep it in your head for the next few minutes. Because embassies are watched, not only by the host country's police, but by anyone with a camera and an interest. Walking up to the gate is the loudest thing an agent can do. That's what the dead drops are for. For nearly 2 years they used the drops. The film moved, and the Soviets got rhyolite. They learned what the satellite could hear, how it was aimed, when it looked, where its ground stations sat. Which meant they could schedule a missile test around it, or start encrypting the telemetry it lived on. Back in California, nothing looked wrong. Boyce showed up for shifts, Lee dealt. The suburb stayed quiet. And this is the point where the whole thing quietly starts to bend out of shape. Lee was skimming. He'd tell Boyce the Soviets paid less than they had, and pocket the difference. He'd also gone from selling to using heroin. A meeting schedule means very little to someone in withdrawal. His film started coming back blurry, whole rolls unusable. His handlers complained, then stopped trusting him. They wanted the source, not the courier. So they pushed to meet Boyce face to face. In 1976, Boyce flew to Mexico City himself and got a clear look at his own future. The Soviets had a plan for him. Learn Russian, finish a degree, get inside the State Department, give them decades. He went home, quit TRW, and enrolled in Russian classes at a California college, doing exactly what they'd asked. Which brings us to the strangest fact in this entire case, and the reason it stings. By January 1977, Boyce had already stopped stealing. The vault was behind him. The source was dry. There was almost nothing left to catch, except Lee, in Mexico City, out of money and out of patience. He'd spent weeks trying to get a meeting. His signals went unanswered. His chalk marks sat there, ignored. Maybe his handler was traveling. Maybe he'd misread a date, standing on the sidewalk, you can't tell which. You felt a small version of this. The message left on read. The second coffee going cold while you wait. The difference is that his version had a rule attached, and on January 6th, he broke it. He drove to the Soviet embassy, walked up to the fence, and threw an envelope over the top. Then he stood on the street waiting for someone to come out and collect him. Nobody came out. What he hadn't accounted for, Mexico City was in the middle of a run of embassy bombings. So every embassy perimeter had police on it, watching for exactly this. A man throwing something over a wall. They had him in under a minute. As far as they knew, they'd just stopped a bombing. They searched him. In his pocket was an envelope of film strips, and he couldn't explain them away. He told them he was a drug dealer. Given his actual situation, that was the flattering version. But the film got developed. The frames showed documents for an American satellite communications program called Pyramider. And here's the detail that makes this story ache. Pyramider was never built. It existed only on paper. Lee was arrested outside a foreign embassy, carrying photographs of a satellite that didn't exist. It was enough. He was handed to the FBI, and under questioning he gave up the man in the vault. On January 16th, 10 days after the fence, agents arrested Christopher Boyce. He was 24. Boyce got 40 years. Lee got life. The damage estimate has never really settled. What isn't disputed, the Soviets learned how America listened, and every method they learned stopped working. Boyce wasn't done. In 1980 he went over the wall at Lompoc prison and vanished for 19 months. He robbed banks across the Northwest and took flying lessons, planning to fly himself to the Soviet Union. They caught him outside a hamburger stand in Port Angeles, Washington, in 1981. He was paroled in 2002. Lee was paroled in 1998. Both men lived to watch the Cold War they'd sold into simply end. So here's what's worth keeping. That operation was never broken by a codebreaker, a mole hunt, or a tail. It was broken by street cops on bomb duty, because one man decided waiting felt worse than risking it. Every protocol you're handed is someone's bad afternoon, written down. The rule isn't there for your good days. 2 altar boys ran a near-perfect operation for 2 years, and lost it in the seconds it took to throw an envelope. Cases like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe, and next we'll take the CIA officer whose neighbors just assumed his wife had money. Take care of each other. We'll see you on the next one.